Okay, welcome attendees. It is 2 o'clock, so we'll get started in just a minute. There's nearly 50 of you online now. Welcome to the Federation of Detached Youth Work live webinar. You shouldn't be able to see each other, although if you want to go over to your participants button, you'll be able to see everyone's names under the attendees section, and then you should also be able to see panelists' names. Who are people who are going to speak up or who are supporting the webinar this afternoon, and they will all have their names listed against them. I'm going to run through some information for you all as participants as we go along, and just do a bit more of an introduction so that you're able to see. We're going to use the chat quite a lot today. And the good news is none of you as participants and attendees are going to be videoed, so you're probably all very happy about that at the moment. But we will be using the chat on the right hand side of your screens, and a number of the panelists will be adding to that conversation and connecting to other information that may be relevant to today's webinar. If you don't want any of the information that you add to the chat recorded in notes or used for information in the future, please could you express that under your name, and we will make sure we remove any of your contributions when we're using that information. Just so people are aware, the information in chat, which I'm sure all of you know now because we're all experts at using Zoom, is confidential in the chat as it comes up during the Zoom webinar, but afterwards it is not confidential if you have messaged each other privately. So just be aware that you may not be putting everything on there confidentially, but we will remove anyone's information if they are concerned about that. So just identify yourself in the chat, and one of my colleagues will be able to remove your information. There are a number of us that I'm going to introduce in a second, but I'm just going to run through a couple of other rules for the webinar today, and just give you a little bit of information about the Federation for Detached Youth Work as well, so you know what you're getting into for the next hour and a half, and we're really happy to have you all on board. I've mentioned about this webinar being recorded, but like I said, none of you are going to be, none of your faces are going to be seen within it. And like I said, we can remove you if you're not wanting to have any of your information recorded from the chat. We will be emailing you all afterwards, so if you also don't want any contact from us in the future, please identify that and we will remove you from that mailing list. But otherwise, we will send you out some notes and information from this webinar and some links to other relevant information afterwards. As within a meeting or a training or workshop session, if we were in real life, please be considerate of the language that we're using to communicate with each other, be that when you're able to speak and ask questions, or in the chat as well. And if you are interested in making a comment or question, please put a Q in the chat, in the written chat section, so that we can identify you and come over to you and get you to contribute in some way. You can also write full questions into the chat boxes, but if you'd like to speak verbally, then we're happy for that as well, and there's going to be 2 opportunities for discussion, so we want you to be part of that as well. So just put the letter Q in that area. And the other thing is that this is a shared experience taking part in a webinar. I know we've all increased our tech knowledge in the last few weeks during this interesting period, so let's help and learn together and experience this as a shared opportunity and get as much as we can from it. You'll see from the Zoom that a number of people who are involved in the Federation of Detached Youth Work our screens are viewed, and you can see some faces, not all of them, because some people's technology is not working as well out in rural areas. But you'll see that we have myself, Steve, Annie, Mike, Ruth, Graham, Miriam, David and Chris. And all of us in some form or another have been involved with the Federation for some of us quite a long time and some of us a shorter amount of time. And some are trustees and some are doing cooperative work to support the Fed at the moment. The Federation of Detached Youth Work is a charity. It's existed for over 25 years to support individual people who are delivering street-based detached or outreach work, but also to support organisations and local authorities. We deliver training. We have quite a lot of information on our website, of which you will see in the chat along the side, and we're entirely volunteer driven at the moment. So also, if you'd like to make a contribution, we have information on our website and on PayPal. So feel free to get involved with us in the future. We're really excited to hear about what's going on in your areas. And that's the overview for what our organisation is. The webinar that we're doing today is focusing on what's happening now in areas across the UK and sharing that good practice. So we've got a number of people speaking on that from their areas. And we're also talking about communities and integration. We may touch a little bit on disproportionality in communities because of the COVID effect and how that fits with detached work. And then also we're going to look to what the future is, how we can plan for the future after easing of guidelines from the government, and what detached youth work can do to support that work in the future. We're loosely going to follow a running order after this introduction of a couple of people speaking, about 3 people speaking, and then about 15 to 20 minutes of questions and comments from participants, and then Graham speaking for 10 to 15 minutes, and then another 15 to 20 minutes of conversation and networking. We will have the webinar open until 4 o'clock, but feel free to leave at whatever point you want after the hour and a half that we've allocated. But that further opportunity will be for networking at the end. And we will be asking at the end of the webinar for some feedback and other information from you guys about what you would like to have other further webinars or discussions about in the future, or if you want to get involved with us around training. So yeah, that's an overview of what we've got going on. The first person we're going to have speak, other than me, you'll be pleased to know it's not my voice all the way through, is Mike Collier. So he's going to come on and talk to us about what's going on in his area, followed by Annie and Ruth. And then we will open it up for all of you attendees to ask questions further to the ones that you've put in the chat, and also to talk to us about what's going on in your areas. So we look forward to this opportunity for us all. Over to Mike.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here. We're saying to a member of staff just the other day how strange it is to be able to talk across so many different people at so many different times. Today I want to express a little bit of the work that I've been doing in a town in the West Midlands. So I'm a detached project manager, and my work is very much around cohesion and integration. As part of our team, we've got 4 detached youth workers that work in very different communities, from South Asian, Eastern European, white British and Irish traveller communities. Needless to say, before COVID-19, the work has been challenging but also rewarding. When COVID-19 came about, there was lots of questions amongst people within communities. Our strapline as an organisation is that we engage, equip and enable and empower communities and young people to have a voice. So within COVID-19, as a team, we sat down and asked ourselves, how do we do that? How do we engage young people and families in a detached context when there's rules and regulations about social distancing? How do we equip people? How do we enable people to have a voice within communities? And how do we empower people to say, this is how we feel? And so that was a piece of work that we were really looking at and trying to figure out how we do that, especially as working with local authorities. We felt that we were being pulled in so many different directions. The police were asking us to go and work with young people and more or less tell them that they should be going home, that they shouldn't be in their space where they are. We had housing groups saying you need to do the same so that we can maybe prosecute. we were working with young people that were being taken home by the police, and as soon as they were being dropped off at the house, were going back out again. This led to families being fined, families that maybe didn't have a regular income. So the added pressure on communities at the very beginning was very real and is very real today. And so from a detached youth work point of view, what we wanted to really figure out was, how do we enable young people and their parents to be able to equip themselves in this difficult situation? In the area that I work, the demographics over the last 2 years have changed significantly. In communities where there've been largely white British families and white British young people, we've found Eastern European families moving in, which has been a cause of tension. In this situation of COVID-19, what we've really struggled with was the hate towards newly arrived communities, especially Eastern European communities. And so, as we've seen the demographic change, as professional youth workers, what we've had to do is look at our own community profile and see how our community profile is actually equipping local people, enabling local young people, and empowering local young people within this situation. So like a lot of people, youth workers across the country, we've been going out and working with young people. Like I said before, we've had tensions from other agencies to say this is what we want to do. So as a piece of good practice as a team, what we did was we sat down and we talked about how we describe the work that we are currently doing with other professionals that might not understand what detached youth work is, especially in this climate. So we put a statement together to say, we're not enforcement officers, we're not going to go into communities and snitch. What we're going to do is we're going to go into communities and advocate for young people and families. We're going to go into communities and actually listen to what people are saying, rather than saying you shouldn't do that. We're going to ask, why are you doing that? So that we get to the root of the reason why they are doing what they're doing. Part of our work is to work with young people that are vulnerable to criminalisation, that young people that are involved in county lines. And over the last couple of weeks, as part of our work, we found that young people are going missing on a more regular basis, that young people aren't actually staying indoors, but neither the police, parents, or other professionals don't actually know where they are. And so as a detached team, what we've been doing is we've been just walking around communities and saying hello and looking for signs. We've been working with young people that we've known for years and just observing their behaviour within this time. There's a couple of young people that we work with that have been missing from education for a long period of time. When we've talked to them about COVID-19 and the pandemic, nothing has really changed for them. Their routine has stayed more or less the same. The only difference being that they get to hang out with their friends a lot earlier than usual because the friends are in school and in education. But they're still there. For them, nothing's changed. But talking to their friends, there's concern for them about when they do go back to school, that social anxiety of having to walk back into a classroom. For some of these young people have already been labelled as no good, that they're not going to get an education. And so for them, that social anxiety has risen. And so as a detached team, we've been doing work with these young people to prepare them for that inevitable step back into education. Some of the other issues that we've found, in particular around cohesion and integration, is that the town that I work in had the first key worker to die in Britain. She was a nurse. She was from a Pakistani family. Yet again, when we talk to young people and families within communities, depending which communities you talk to, some were saying that she deserved to die. that she shouldn't have been doing the job that she was doing? Was she even educated enough to do that? And these were some of the prejudices that we were coming up against. And so tensions were running high. Just last week, we had a number of Chinese restaurants and takeaways graffitied and vandalised by young people. When we've talked to young people about this situation, they very much are of the opinion that it's their fault that this pandemic is going on, and they shouldn't even be in this country anyway. This reminds me of a story that happened before the pandemic, about 3 years ago, when we were on a detached session, and we were walking through an area when two girls came running up to us and said, Mike, we're under attack, we're under attack. And I said, what do you mean we're under attack? And they talked about this country that we're going to bomb, England. And when I said, which country are you on about? They said, the country's ISIS. We had a conversation about the fact that ISIS actually isn't a country, and that the likelihood of that happening where we live were very slim. But then I asked the question, where did you get that information from? And they responded by saying, our parents. When I asked the question, where did the parents get that information from? They said the internet. The reason why I share that story is because when I'm talking to young people today, very much the information that they get is from people that they respect, that maybe get it from sites that aren't necessarily telling the truth about this pandemic. And so the attacks on Eastern European families that we've been working with, attacks on Oriental families that we've been working with, have all come from misinformation. And so as a detached team, what we're looking to do is provide correct information, provide information that speaks in a way that young people understand. And so as a team, we've commissioned a spoken word artist to come out with us and to do some spoken word around what the situation is, around how young people are feeling today. Because what we're hearing from young people is, we're told we can't do this, we're told we can't go there, we're told what we should and shouldn't do. And so yet again, what's happening for a lot of young people is they're having things done to them, not with them. And so as a detached team, what we're looking to do is work with young people in short periods of time. So we're setting up things like WhatsApp groups where young people can just ask questions to groups where there's members of staff that are there, so that when we're not out on the street, we still have that connection. We're looking at ways in which we can work online with Zoom and other things. But what we really realised from all this is that the communities we're working in, and young people in particular, are changing. This pandemic has had an effect on young people. It's brought fear. It's brought a little bit of freedom for some, but it's had an effect on young people and how they behave. It's had an effect on families. And so as detached youth workers, what we're doing is we're working with young people to put packs together of activities and advice that young people can get, so that it ain't just coming from the adult with a badge on saying who we are and who we work for. It's actually coming from young people to young people. Because if we want to make an impact in communities, then what we need to do is we need to listen, we need to observe, and we need to work with. And that's what we're starting to do. So our community profiles are very much showing us the way in which we should work. We do 3 hours a day, 2 till 3, 5 till 6, and 8 till 9. That's because as we've walked around the streets, we've realised that this is when young people are out and about, and it's nothing fancy. There's not much of a heavy engagement. It's just, we're here. This is what we can offer. This is how you can get in touch with us. How are you doing? And that's what we really feel within this time. Young people need to hear. They need to hear that there's adults that are prepared to challenge, but in a way that looks out for their best interests. And there's adults that are prepared to listen. And there's adults that are there that will hopefully be able to enable young people to have a voice. And so that's the kind of work that we're doing within communities. it is a struggle at times. We have seen an increase in hate crime, especially towards Oriental young people within the city. And so we're looking at ways in which we can work in partnership to equip them and make them feel part of a community. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, someone has asked a question which I think is relevant from what you've been talking about. We really appreciate how candid you've been about what's going on in your area. The question was, how exactly are you going about doing the detached work? So you've said you're going out during different time periods, but can you give a bit of a description about what that looks like for the workers when they're out on the streets, so so people can understand what that social distancing might look like in a work situation? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. One of the things that we realised from kind of the beginning was around advertising, and actually when we go out, what's expected. So there's been certain areas that we work in where we've been able to go out prior and put notices up saying the detached team will be here from 2 till 3. While we're here, this is sort of our guidance. We will not sort of, we will keep 2 meters apart. We will have conversations, but we will be, say, on this street at this time, and then we'll be moving to this area from this time, so that communities actually know that we're going to be out there. So that the message that we're giving isn't going against what the government are saying as well. So we're very clear that this is where we're going. We put information up on shop windows. There's been some houses of local people that we know that we've posted the information through letterboxes. So it's that word of mouth, but we've kept that social distancing. And we found that the WhatsApp group has really worked well from that respect as well. So we've been able to put things out on WhatsApp.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just checking that there's no further questions for you. A couple of people are asking, can you give a little bit more information about the location where you work, so geographically in the UK? Just because I think people can guess from your accent, but just in case, Mike.
Yeah, well, my accent's actually deceiving. I work in Walsall in the West Midlands.
Okay, and do you want to mention a little bit about the young people that you normally work with in that area, so that people can get an idea and compare it to where they are?
Yeah, sure. So we work across a borough-wide remit. So communities that we work in range from South Asian communities to Afro-Caribbean communities to white British communities as well.
Okay, great.
We also do some work around the missing agenda, so young people that are missing, both from education and also along county lines.
Okay, and there's a couple more questions, Mike, so apologies, I'm trying to keep up with all the ones that are coming up on the chat. So some people are just asking, maybe you could talk about it in terms of what your management have been putting in terms of their guidelines about not encouraging young people to come out and see you, and where that balance is in terms of what's following social distancing guidelines and what is not, and how you're still trying to support those groups of young people.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really quite interesting because when you do detached youth work training, you talk about the hi and bye kind of situation. So quite often it has been literally, hi, how are you? I'm very well. How's it going? Okay. Pass on some information. This is how you can get in contact with us, and walk on. So it's been sometimes as quick as that. Other times what we've found is, and this has been through sort of promoting to communities, actually what guidance is out there. So we've had young people that have come out and stayed in the garden and had conversations with us about how it's going. So for us, what we were wanting was just to be a bit of a presence in communities that maybe feel a little bit hard done to as well. But very much a lot of our engagement sort of outside of gardens, etc., has been, hi, how are you? Here's some information. This is how you can get in touch with us. These are some websites that you can go on to, etc., etc.
So it's not necessarily detached work in the way that some people would understand in developing those relationships over a long time. It's moving, it's encouraging young people to still be within social guidelines from the government.
I mean, I've been working in these communities for 15 years. So there's young people now that we were working with before this happened that are children of parents, etc. So so yeah, it's about keep maintaining that link, and if people have questions, then we set up different ways so that young people can ask.
Okay, and a couple more questions. People are loving hearing about your work, Mike, and then we're going to move on to Annie and Ruth afterwards. How well has the advertising worked for you in terms of getting young people into other forms of provision that you're offering? And then there was a question that I'll mention it because otherwise people may think I've not seen it, about other community organisations that you might be working with and whether you've been asked to do anything on their behalf as well. So maybe if you could tackle the advertising one first, and then I'll come back to the second one.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting because although our role is part of local authority, we're very much around integration and cohesion, which might be a bit strange in these times when people are kind of not integrating and maybe aren't feeling cohesive. So some of the communities we work in, we work alongside the Afghan Community Association. So there's 97 families that come from Afghanistan that live in Warsaw at this moment in time, some of whom English isn't their first, second or third language. And so if you can imagine the state that we're in as a country at this moment and not being able to understand what's going on, and maybe having that false information given to them by others. So from a communication point of view, what we've done is we've done leaflets, not just in English, but in other languages as well. And we've done that so that maybe the young people can understand what we're saying, but so that then they can take it home to the parents so that they understand what the guidelines are saying, because that's where confusion and some stereotype and judgment comes into it. So it's been more than just posting leaflets through a door saying this is what we are, this is what we're doing. It's been looking at how we can reach some of those unheard communities as well that don't understand that at this moment in time social mixing can't happen, etc. All in all, the advertising side of things, it's kind of worked and kind of haven't. You know, I'm a firm believer that youth work's about young people choosing to engage. We did a little bit of a poll to ask when young people would like youth workers to be out and about. We got some intelligence from other agencies to say that young people are gathering at this time, rather than us going in and laying down the law. Can you go and sort of share the information? So it's been, yeah, it's been touch and go.
Okay. That's good, thank you. I think people will appreciate knowing the ups and downs, actually, to be honest. And then the other question was about, have you been working with other community organisations?
Yeah.
And has it been difficult for other organisations that don't have detached work experience to be able to still engage with residents and participants within the community that they normally do? Thank you.
No, that's a really good question. I suppose for us in Warsaw, we've been really fortunate in that there's a youth organisation called Kick FM who work along sort of the digital platform of youth work, and they even were working along that before this whole thing arose. So we've worked in partnership with them, and they do sort of an online youth work chat kind of activities for young people on a Tuesday and Wednesday. So part of our work, and we've gone out, is we've promoted other, if you like, online youth work that's going on as well. And also, you know, we trust them as a youth organisation, and we know that the messages that they give are in line with our policies and procedures. So we've worked with them to, so when I talk about the online work, that's who we've been partnering with there. We've been working with other organisations as well to look at how we can set up a generic, so the WhatsApp group that we run, other organisations have taken that as a good idea and used that to keep in contact with people as well. So we've had quite I think if there's one thing that's come out of this that's been good, is it's brought organisations together to talk through how we do this.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Okay, if we move on to Annie, who's going to talk a little bit about what's going on in her area, we'd really appreciate that. Then, Annie, there may be some questions. I'll keep a view on the chat, and then Ruth is going to follow you as well. So thank you very much, and over to Annie. Annie, if you'd just like to introduce where in the UK you work as well, and a little bit about the type of young people you normally work with, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're a detached youth work team in Greater Manchester, so we're in Trafford. We're in our first year in operation, so we're quite new. We were kind of gearing up for our first kind of big summer, being busy. It's been quite a quiet winter where we've been, and our team were quite excited to kind of, you know, get really creative. We've started to get some good kind of established groups of young people, but still really in those early stages. So this has been quite a struggle for us. We're part of a wider local authority team, so we link into youth justice, young parents, missing from home, CSE, and we have kind of general drop-ins for young people, and that's been a long-standing service, but our kind of traditional youth work was cut 5 years ago, and our team was kind of the resurgence of that last year. So we're quite new in kind of bringing back some traditional youth work, and that's been done through Detached Youth Work. During lockdown, we've been largely directed by GMP, which is Greater Manchester Police, and Trafford has actually been really quiet, and young people haven't really been going out. They really have been following the guidelines. I know other local authority detached teams have been asked to be out because young people have been out in force, but we've actually been asked to stay in, and we're kind of fed information from the police, and we kind of share information through our social media platforms to try and encourage peer support for young people to stay in. But really, we've been thanking young people for staying in and for listening to guidance, and Trafford's been really kind of successful at that happening. But what we wanted to do before this happened was develop an online offer, and that was part of what our team was going to do. The detached team were going to have kind of a street-based and an online offer for young people. So we didn't really know where to start with that. None of us are particularly techie, and we didn't kind of, we've been promoting our social medias when we're out with young people. We've got little business cards that we give them that have our Facebook and our Instagram and our Twitter on. So we did have kind of a small following, and Trafford is quite a small borough in Greater Manchester anyway. But we've actually used this time, because we haven't been in the street, to try and develop that side of it and try and kind of still keep it linked into detached youth work, which isn't necessarily that easy. We kind of decided that we didn't want to push going out into the street and take in a kind of enforcement role, which I know has happened with other teams in Greater Manchester, where, I mean, some teams have kind of just been sort of like talking to young people from afar from the car, which we felt wasn't really the way that we wanted to work, especially because we're in such a beginning stage of our team and building relationship with young people. We've developed an online program, so every day we're basically delivering stuff virtually to young people. It's completely open access, and that's also been done a lot in partnership with other youth organisations across Manchester, which has been great for us to build up some links with them as well. But we've been having kind of like live debates about music and crime and how this affects young people, and various things that we have conversations about on the street, that we've been trying to bring to kind of a virtual platform that young people can come to, and they can kind of have an input, and we can discuss. As we develop it, we're hoping that we can get more young people involved in actually delivering this with us, that we already work with. But it has been quite a slow process, and we have been completely learning on the job because we're not tech wizards. So we've got Rachel, who's listening right now, who's been absolutely incredible. She's been teaching pretty much the whole youth engagement service how to use Instagram. So yeah. So also what we've done though in this time is you actually use this time to step back a little bit and link in with the rest of the youth work sector in Trafford and like the voluntary sector. And there's so much good youth work going on, and I think sometimes being part of a local authority, we can kind of get a little bit stuck in our own bubble. So we're actually stepping back from our own agenda a little bit and taking this time to really build up some good partnerships. You know, we're kind of trying to put together a youth work network across our locality so that we can, when we come back, really work together, build networks, and going forward kind of have a more community orientated partnership approach to detached work, and through that hopefully have kind of like networks across the borough and going into Greater Manchester as we develop that. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're just adapting, taking a minute to kind of actually step back and think about what we do, and that's it really.
Thank you, Annie. There's a couple of questions in the chat that I'm just going to ask you, so I hope you don't mind being put on the spot. Don't worry, you don't have to check it. So have you had any issues with online bombing in any of your online provision that you've been developing?
No, luckily we haven't, and I don't really know what we'd do if we've done it. We've kind of discussed it's really difficult discussing safeguarding, and kind of, you know, making sure that there isn't any inappropriate content when you're doing something like open access online, because anyone can access it. In terms of people being able to look at our accounts and see the content, we do vet everyone that follows us. Generally, we only let them accept them if they're quite obviously a young person or an organisation, and we also kind of monitor this and remove people from our accounts. And we don't follow anyone back unless they're an organisation as well. So in terms of young people's privacy, and then there's also GDPR and consent and things like that. So we keep it very basic and very simple. But luckily, no, we haven't had any issues like that. So hopefully we won't.
Okay. And what kind of conversations and debates have you been having with young people on the virtual platform? Could you maybe give a couple of examples?
Yeah, so last week we had a debate about drill music and grime, and as opposed to kind of rock music, and how drill is quite often used as a scapegoat, especially in kind of ethnic minority communities, which we have a lot of in Trafford, especially in Old Trafford, and how rock music, which is more predominantly white music genre, talks a lot about drugs and violence, but isn't seen as a negative influence on young people, and had a discussion about this, and then people could ask questions, and it was discussed. So we haven't had a huge kind of input. There's a lot of people listening, some people asking questions, a lot of other youth workers are listening as well, and they're asking questions and asking about what they're doing in their area. So and again, it's something that we're developing slowly. We're trying to kind of have a broad range of stuff, from advising people about kind of keeping fit, being creative, staying busy, positive and healthy, to kind of critically discussing things and challenging things. So we're trying to have a really broad range of things, whilst also not being able to leave our homes or kind of having access to anything, which is generally what you do on the street anyway. You kind of use yourself as your resource. So trying to keep it fresh and interesting, but it has been really difficult. It's not been easy, and it is slowly building with our kind of content and engagement with young people, but it has been a slow build because we're a new team and because we weren't expecting to be kind of doing everything virtually straight away. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Annie. I see that Don and someone else has put information, has asked some questions about what's happening after the lockdown. We're actually going to go on to that in the second part of our discussion. So we will come back to that Don, later on through this webinar. Thank you, Annie. You can go back and check on any of the chat questions. There's no more that seems specific to you other than the things that you've already talked about. So thank you for adding your position at the moment in the UK. We're going to move over to Ruth now, just to talk about what's going on in her area. So welcome, Ruth. Thank you very much.
Thanks. My name's Ruth Ware. I'm a youth worker. I work in Halifax for Collier local authority. That's in West Yorkshire. And normally I'm a detached youth worker, but because of lockdown, since then I've been working from home. I've been making phone calls to young people, a lot of phone calls. We've done some small group work online, and as a project we're running a Zoom drop-in. It's now on a daily basis, and we do have contact over Facebook and Twitter as well. A lot of our as part of the wider service, a lot of the centre-based workers have started to go out, and they're going out with the police and the community wardens and supporting them to work with, to encourage young people to go home and check on their welfare. I haven't been very involved with that, so I think there's some people who are in this meeting who are part of that. But from home, I have had some really interesting conversations with the young people, and they've been really good. We've been talking about Covid-19 and how it's affecting them, how it's affecting their relationships with their friends and with their families, and how it's affecting their mental health. And that has led to quite a lot of follow-up work. Offering extra support, making links with other agencies, and even doing referrals and things like that, and advocating on young people's behalf. But having said that, I do miss getting out and being outside and having those conversations outside with young people face to face, and being part of street life and being a witness to the current reality for young people. And what's going on the street and in the community in real time. I miss being part of young people's lives that I'm normally privy to, and I know some of what's going on, but not the whole picture because I'm not out and about. So it's sort of to start the ball rolling, really. Is I wonder if people could comment on their experience of being out on the street now compared to how it was for them before, and also if you're not on the street now, what are you doing?
So Ruth has set up the questions for all of you, and I'm happy to unmute people who would like to make a contribution. I saw that a few people were commenting, which is really great, about their experiences in the chat. But if anyone would like to indicate, then I can take questions directly, so you can verbally speak about it. Also, Ruth and Annie and Mike, I think if you might be able to speak from your colleague's perspective, can any of you comment on how you've managed large numbers online? I think, Ruth, you mentioned that you're doing Zoom drop-ins. Could you maybe give a quick comment back to the question that's about how to manage young people all coming onto a Zoom at the same time? And then after that, Carl, I'm going to come to you for a comment. Thank you, Ruth.
We haven't had that large a number. I think it's probably about 8 or 9, but I think it's going to get bigger. We manage it quite tightly, and we do sort of, we've put ground rules down, and we will kick people out, because what we've worked out is if you unmute people, you can unmute yourself, kind of thing. So that didn't work. Yeah, we haven't done large numbers yet, so I don't really know.
Okay. Mike or Annie, did either of you want to comment on that? You just shake your heads if you don't, because I think Ruth has answered it pretty cleverly. Okay, so there is one more question, Ruth, that would be great if you could answer, which is just, you've mentioned about talking to people by phone or one-to-one meetings. A question from Roisin is, do you find it difficult talking about young people's mental health with their families if they're on a virtual or phone call? Maybe Annie also might be able to comment on this as well. So the question is it difficult to talk about mental health that way?
Most young people I'm speaking to, particularly about those sort of issues, they either live on their own, and that's part of the reason that they've got some of those issues and they're feeling quite isolated, or they're in their bedroom, so there's no one else around, if that's what you mean.
Okay, yeah, I think that's what the question is about, yeah. So generally parents haven't been in the background of the virtual situation.
No.
Great. Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers the question. Right, Carl, I'm going to come to you so that you can ask your question or put a comment through. You should be there, Carl.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Carl Storm. I'm from Youth Inspired in Peterborough. We've heavily relied on Zoom for contacting young people over the last couple of weeks. And on Monday this week, we started a 4-week programme for the next 4 weeks with activities every single day. What we did was we set up a safeguarding document, an application form. The young people's parents have then contacted us. We've logged them, we've created a file for them, and then each of the individual artists that are presenting the groups every day then take this information and send the young people the Zoom information. So they've got the link and the passcode, so there's no chance of anyone bombing it. There's no chance of anything like that at all, to be honest with you. So we're quite happy with the way that we've set that up. Another thing that we do at the start of every single Zoom session is do a safeguarding talk. So we say to the young people, look, can you just please imagine that you're in a youth club, and what you can see and what we can see is pretty much the same. So don't go out of your rooms, don't go into the rooms with the people in there. Just try and keep it as normal as possible, because we've had a case of a young person going downstairs. His mum's boyfriend was on the sofa, laid there in a pair of shorts. It's just things like that. So we've sort of safeguarded as much as possible at the start of the sessions. It's really, really difficult. The participation numbers we're getting between 8 and 10. Hopefully that will grow. We do support other organisations in Peterborough as well, because we're a charity and we can do that, we can fund them. So through this time we've been doing lockdown packs that we're taking out to young people to get involved in the sessions and stuff. We've got art sessions, photography sessions, body positive sessions and things like that. So if young people need materials, we just send them out. We've got a growing project at the minute, so we've sent young people loads of seeds out to do growing projects, to sunflower growing, to see who can grow the tallest sunflower and things like that. So we're being very proactive in trying to do some social action stuff as well. So yeah, I do understand what you're saying. It's really, really difficult, but there's just a few ideas that we're doing, so hopefully that might help anybody else.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Carl. And I know that's some of the things that Mike has also been mentioning, like the packs out to families. So yeah, we really appreciate you commenting on that, Carl. It seems like you've got things going really well in your area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who wanted to jump in and make a comment like Carl? Or I know we've had some conversations about rural detached work. We appreciate that we haven't spoken about that specifically. All of the examples that we've had are more town or city based, and we'll definitely make sure we get something out on the website. But I appreciate also that people are responding to each other within the chat, which is really positive. I like that you're all helping each other out. What we're going to do in terms of timing is move on. Oh, sorry, Graham's asking to make a comment. Let me unmute him so he can speak, and then we're going to move on to the second part of our webinar about what things could look like in the future. Over to you, Graham.
I think I'm still unmuted.
No,
Yeah.
you're mute. Yeah.
Are we all good?
Yeah.
I wanted to share a quick image in response to Carl's previous comments, if I may. I wonder if people saw this article in The Guardian just a week or so ago. It draws attention to a piece of work I've been involved in locally in Leeds, where we commissioned some street performers to actually go out with detached youth workers and get young people involved in just a little bit of dancing, and they moved on to the next little area and subsequently on to the next. So on each occasion there was just a few of them there, so we had a discussion about social distancing and whatever, but it was this kind of movement of the workers that was interesting, that we could take this opportunity to be active and be social within the kind of confines of the regulations at the moment, and we'd run it past the police and others, and they were fine with all this. So it's to say that there are still some possibilities to do quite interesting creative youth work in the time that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So there have been a couple of questions. Sorry, I've just seen one from someone and it zipped past because so many people were commenting. So something about, let me be able to read it, about space and what centre-based work, how detached work is different from centre-based. I can't seem to scroll up my chat, so I apologise to everyone for that. I will try and pick up that question in a moment. What we're going to do now is move on to the second part of our webinar, where Graham is going to talk and share his screen and show us a couple of images as well, to get us all in the mood with using all this Zoom technology. And he's going to be talking, well, I'll let him explain what he's going to be talking about himself, so as not to preempt everything. So thank you, Graham, and over to you.
Okay. I hope people can see the image I've just shown. I've already talked about it, but just to reiterate the point that in some sense or other, it's still possible to do, if you like, old detached youth work. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes with some images that I hope might kind of get us going for a subsequent conversation about futures. I was lucky enough to get my copy of Private Eye this morning, and I do like Private Eye, and there were a couple of cartoons that amused me. This was the first one. I don't know whether you can see the caption there. It's a bit like what's happening in our house. But a more pertinent cartoon is this one, in which the caption is, "I'll be glad when all this creativity is over and we can get back to normal." So we've been treated in recent times to this extraordinary phrase, the new normal. And my question is really, who will determine what the new normal is? So I've got a couple of thoughts about this. The first one is to consider just this kind of idea of lockdown. And many of you will know I've got a strong interest in the use of geography as a way of understanding detached youth work. So it implicitly talks about constraints to our accessing of public space. And of course, detached youth workers historically are people who move in public space and are interested in and concerned to observe, as has been said, the movements of young people, what in geography they might call mobilities, or in the current context, the immobilities of young people, the things that kind of constrain their movement. I've been in conversation with a pal who lives in Barcelona, and of course this week we've seen images of the people there, young people there, who have literally, for the first time in 6 weeks, been allowed out of their houses and homes. And this kind of idea of being free to actually be outside, as Ruth mentions, it seems really quite extraordinary to us, because we've had these freedoms. So in the support work I've been doing for local detached youth workers, we've really tried to encourage young people to take some exercise. And yet, as has also been mentioned by Mike, we've got this extraordinary diversity of response to the situation we're in which some young people are quite literally terrified to go outside of their homes, and others, they seem to have kind of carried on regardless. But these kind of everyday over the fence conversations seem peculiarly important in sort of teasing out the reasons for these anxieties, or indeed the lack of anxieties about COVID-19. So, you know, it's one thing for everybody to be subject to messages through the media, but it's another, and a valuable other, when detached youth workers can actually have those kinds of conversations. And of course, they can lead into further conversations about what some people have called fake news and conspiracy theory in relation to COVID-19. This particular document was written in early March, and by the Federation for Detached Youth Work, and subsequently we put it on one side and wrote another one, because what changed was the concept of lockdown. And in this document, which I think we're going to have to revisit soon, we talked about things that you could do that were kind of safe and outdoors. One of the examples I gave that I stole from people who have been doing it, it was playing frisbee. And now I recognise there's probably some issues with people being in contact with a frisbee, but the idea was that there were things you could do where people would be spaced out outdoors, but still outdoors and enjoying being outdoors. So we'll have another look at this document, because it may now come back into operation, if you like, given the likelihood that some freedoms are going to come in the next few weeks that we haven't had under lockdown. So there's a context to being outside. Most of us are certainly on message when it comes to the value of that as an environment for taking a bit of exercise. Similarly, the value of it as an experience that supports positive mental health. And that sort of takes me to a broader question about how we might engage with a health agenda in the future. You know, the horrors of perversely reaching the top of the league tables for the numbers of deaths in Europe. There's a complex picture here, but it's absolutely clear that we know that the health profiles of nations are really quite critical to the effect of the virus on people. And if you're fit and well, generally speaking, there'll be modest effects on you and you'll recover quite quickly. But if you're not so well, then, you know, it really becomes risky to contract COVID-19. So it's been said before, but, you know, we live in a poorly nation, and it may be that public space work, if we can call it that, becomes increasingly important and needs to be increasingly important in the future. So this kind of idea that we might really, really try to value public space much, much more. One of the things that's fascinated me, just a quick image that I should have showed you a moment ago to underline the point I've just made, but one of the things that's fascinated me is some of the attempts to try to keep people safe in moving in our communities. And you will have seen these in towns and cities across Britain, and increasingly they come into place. And what they are practical measures to create space for cyclists and pedestrians to actually be able to socially distance as they move around. But what's peculiarly interesting is that it involves a reduction of road space. it's a limiting of the car. And that, of course, has got an extraordinary resonance with concerns that have been growing in recent years about climate change, which is the top of the list for young people's concerns about their futures. So we have this kind of temporary situation in which there are multiple benefits for young people, for their health, living in environmental conditions that are less polluted, for their sociality, and perhaps because we're more present in public space, getting it a little bit less in the neck, you know, for being outside, because we value it differently. We know that people will have to get outside. This image came to me recently. The idea that, you know, we as practitioners could be involved and really should be involved in a future where we start discussing how we use the space in our towns and cities and villages very much more differently. And an image from Berlin recently, where the streets are literally empty of cars and young people. It's almost like an image from the 1950s or something, where young people are going back to using ordinary streets as places to play. So, you know, the question then becomes, you know, can we secure these temporary gains to and be involved in a kind of a discussion about the future of the environments in which we live? Now, of course, on the other side of that coin is this age-old discussion that existed in the last webinar about social control. And we've had references again to detached youth workers being contacted by the police saying, you know, there's young people down there congregating, can you go and sort them out? We prefer that your friendly approach takes place rather than us going in heavy-handedness. So, but we know we've got legislation on the statute books now, and it is worth saying that the Coronavirus Act, it's been put on the statute books for 2 years. So I suspect there's a general acceptance of its value at this moment, but there is an important question about its longevity. You know, the arguments were literally lost to say that we should have this act in place on a rolling programme, reviewed every 3 months to establish its value. But it's there now for 2 years. And if you read the detail of it, what you'll find is that there are extraordinary new powers to stop and search people and so on and so on. So I'm really making an argument that in the future, as it comes forward, we need to avoid a kind of a linear thinking in which we think, well, we keep people safe and then we'll argue about, you know, their rights. These need to be parallel conversations. It's not about either or. You know, the future it could go 2 ways. We could get, as I've suggested, this possible wider value in a public space, or we could get the increased use through the back door, if you like, of stop and search systems that have been so harmful in many, many communities. It's complicated, but my sense is that we need to be involved in these multiple conversations at the same time. Now, of course, the other side of that dystopian position is what we've observed in all our communities in which detached youth workers have been extraordinarily involved in, is this kind of civic goodwill. You know, on my own street, you know, people that I've known by sight but never really communicated with, you know, people are kind of helping each other. So there's a question about whether this will constitute also a temporary phenomenon, and whether we can, as detached youth workers, secure some kind of long-lived community capacity that builds upon the volunteering of people who have never ever volunteered before. You know, people involved in the distribution of food, doing shopping for others, checking in on the elderly, giving them, you know, making telephone calls. So we've got a kind of a heightened sense of values, community value, solidarity, mutual help, care, compassion, cooperation. They're the lifeblood of many of the values that have informed the history of detached youth work. And again, you know, the question about whether it can keep this values conversation alive is important, because, you know, will the new normal, as it's called, you know, see a shift in these values? And I have been a critic of policy in recent years because, as I'm sure many of you will appreciate, that that we've seen policy drivers much more into targeted, individuated kind of work. So I suspect we have an opportunity now to broaden out again and start trying to talk the language of community work, detached youth work as a form of community work. In terms of values, some of them become stark. I'm thinking about the value of equality, or more pertinently, inequality. I've had conversations with colleagues in Newham recently, and of course we find that Newham has really been hit hard. As a reference to Sunderland in the chat room, but you know, the 144 deaths per 100,000. You know, it's the top of the list. What a list to be the top of. The mortality rate's the worst in England and Wales. Brent not far behind, Hackney not far behind, and we know what the story is. We're talking about health inequalities and hydro inequalities, but the stark reality is that these are twice the levels in the more advantaged areas. The top 10% of most deprived wards, yeah, twice the levels of mortality than the wealthiest 10%. And we're told, of course, ironically, that COVID-19 is a leveller. Yeah, I mean, it's simply not true. We know in places like Newham, Mike Collier alluded to the context in Walsall, we've got extraordinary rates of existing deprivation. It's not new deprivation. We've got diversity, we've got vulnerable populations, we've got more than half of children living in poverty, in temporary overcrowded accommodation, in intergenerational households. Yeah, in Newham there are 36,000 people not paid the legal minimum wage. The Resolution Foundation today tells us that a further 600,000 young people are going to be unemployed because of COVID-19. So I move to a point about perhaps a more political future for us as detached youth workers. As a member of the international network, I got the job of writing the international political statement, and talking to colleagues all over the world, they all said to me, when you write this, Graham, you need to make sure that that this is a political document. So I draw your attention quickly to some of the things that it says in there. You know, we've got this sense that we've got an approach, yeah, a preventative approach that doesn't just favour individuals targeted within it, it favours all people in society. There's a concern in this document that we could face a further era of austerity after this, yeah, and yet there's this optimistic position that we put into the statement. The statement's available on the Fed website. It's important that we see this pandemic as perhaps peculiarly an opportunity. It shows that we are capable of taking radical measures to respond to emergencies. Homeless people have been housed, yeah, for the first time in a generation. We know we can do these things, yeah. We should know also that 20% of those that were housed have subsequently left that accommodation because of claims of antisocial behaviour, or they can't cope with the institutionalised environment. So there'll always be a need for street work. And in this final point, we've got this kind of awareness that if we can tackle these kinds of issues, we can tackle others, environmental issues, economic issues, social issues, democratic issues, but overwhelmingly what we're going to need is some solidarity in doing it. So I think there's a place there for political education and the recognition that politics is a social phenomenon, and we can use the social dimensions of our work to encourage young people to get involved in politics, encourage their self-advocacy. But the social also represents something that we really have found out is so important to young people. You know, young people have told us that this is what they value more than anything: hanging out with their pals, a hug from a grandparent. You know, so these are kind of core values that sometimes this kind of technical approach to youth work has passed by a little bit, and I hope in the future we can regain that. There's an interesting thing about all these people who've come out of the woodwork to support in the education and learning of children at this time. So I think there's a conversation for us to be involved in about the future of learning, the future of education, you know, the future of what it is, what, you know, what the concepts of the school. And my final point is about, again, it's a favourite topic of mine, I know, but it's about how time works. You know, what we've got and what we've seen for the first time in the lives of many workers, detached youth workers and others, is we've had a little bit of space to have a good think about the future. I talked recently to an organiser from the National Education Union who's always on the case of teachers about how we can make schools a better place to be. And they always say, I've got no time to do this, to get involved in this conversation. And now they have, yeah. This is a picture of Michael Apple, the educational theorist. I remember reading his thesis on intensification. He said that teachers are deliberately kept busy, overloaded in work, not to increase the productivity of schools, but rather to eliminate spaces for dialogue in which conversations, criticisms of, you know, what education is like in the modern world can be made. And I suspect that's been part of our life as detached youth workers. You know, we always say we haven't got time to sit down and talk and argue about what's important. So if there was anything that I hope we can carry forward into the future, is this peculiar experience we've had in joining in webinars and whatever else, where we can start imagining a new future for young people and detached youth work. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Graham, if you could unshare your screen, I will put up our website just so people can have a quick look at that. I want to thank everyone who's been putting comments in the chat. I've picked up a couple that I think we may be able to comment on. The main reason I want to show our website is just so people can get an idea that we have put up practical information on our website, and also so you can see what it looks like when you go searching for it. And it follows up some of what Graham said and also some of the stuff that Mike has talked about. And then I'm going to come back to a couple of the comments that have been raised from Graham's discussion and the comments earlier. So if you just give me a second, I will just share the website screen so you can all see. So this is our website, and if you go along this section in resources and in videos, there's a number of little short clips that we've done. Also a previous webinar that the MYA hosted that Graham and I both spoke at about practical ways of dealing with engaging with young people in detached work. And then if you scoot down, these are all our blogs. You'll be pleased to know Graham and I aren't wearing the same things we wore in the last webinar. There's some detailed information about what's going on in Europe, which you will have seen in the chat. We're looking at thinking about a Europe-wide webinar in the future. But down here in the practical guidance section, there's some very basic information about how to go about doing detached work in the way that Mike and Annie and Ruth have talked about when they were speaking earlier. So it's just to remind you that you can cross over and look at some of that information as well. And it also links you up to all of the websites that colleagues have been putting in the chat, particularly the MYA UK Youth and the Mix, and also the government guidelines, which I'm sure you're all very much on top of. So yeah, thank you very much. So a couple of questions that came up. One was that Don was just talking about having positive relationships with the police at the moment, which I think is really great example. I think a lot of people who are out there doing detached prior to this time may have had complex relationships between the police and detached services. Actually, in the last service that I used to manage, we had very good relationships with the police, and we were able to keep boundaries and understand what our role was and what their role was. We didn't always go out together, but we definitely had sessions about response to serious youth violence. That's particularly focused in the London area, and I know that applies to Mike as well in the areas that he's been working with, because we've discussed that in the past. So if you have got good examples of where you're working alongside the police, particularly local community police at the moment, then please make sure you post about them in the chat or the Q&A, or contact us directly and we'll be able to talk more about that. Then I just wanted to mention that a couple of people have mentioned, I saw comments about suicide and death and grief. That's also something that came up in the last webinar, and it's something that I'm personally quite interested in, what coronavirus and what young people's understanding of a pandemic and death and grief looks like at the moment, but also what that might mean in the future for the way that we in the UK look at death, hopefully in a more holistic way and with more support around that. There aren't a lot of organisations that I'm aware of doing a lot of work on this, so it probably is youth workers taking on a lot of mental health support around this, you know, and absorbing that information from young people and communities at the moment. So just in relation to Keith posting about that, make sure you're getting support through your management teams, your boards if you're a local organisation, or other counselling services that might be around. There's some that I know about in London who are moving online and offering counselling that way, but they haven't got as huge take up, which is what we've talked about. So yeah, those are just a couple of the points that I know were mentioned, Graham, while you were talking. There was a bit more questions about the response for detached work being more about youth and community, and I know you've commented on that a little bit, but I wonder if there's anything further that you just wanted to give a short answer about detached work being much more than just working with young people at the moment. I know we discussed that the other day. Graham, if you want to comment on that.
Thank you. I speak from a sort of philosophical point of view, but also from a practical view of having been out with detached youth workers quite a lot recently. And this is one of the things I've been really conscious of, and I put it in the chat that it's so very difficult to start making relationships with people at the moment, and there's a kind of a natural fear going around that disables the ease that of making relationships. So if you are known, if you have relationships, if you've been visible often for a long time in communities, you are so extraordinarily advantaged at the moment, and you're able to have conversations just because people know your face. So it's a sort of simple point about not just being known to young people, it's being known, you know, much more widely.
Okay, great, thank you. And yeah, I would just say in terms of communities, and I know Mike might want to comment on this as well, that actually probably what's happening at the moment is there's much more interaction with parents, families and other community members about what people are out and about doing in their local communities. I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to comment on that, it would be great if you could.
Yeah, just one thing really that's linking with sort of grief that we talked about. In one community that we work in, it's only a small housing estate, 3 or 4 streets, if that, quite deprived. One of the things that's happened is within that community, they've had quite a few deaths from Covid-19. What's been so impressive, having seen this and walked around and talked to people, is that people have come together. So they've given money to help for the funerals. When the funerals happened, they've stood social distancing apart and watched and sort of celebrated the life of the person who died, but also come together to support the family, even though they can't be at the service itself. So communities have really sort of come together through that and have taken that extra step of supporting as well, which has been really good to see.
Great, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I'll just mention from a personal point of view, having attended an online funeral recently that was quite a strange experience, is that it did it didn't feel like the same closure as meeting colleagues and friends and family members as you would to go and celebrate someone's life in what we're calling the real world, but it did still feel like you were able to acknowledge the presence of that person and have a connection with the other people that were there. I've heard also in my local area of people standing outside their houses, similarly to the way people have been clapping on a Thursday, and having the car drive down the road and people acknowledging that, sort of in a more old-fashioned way that we might have recognised wakes or funerals, you know, probably prior to the changes that we've made recently in the world. So yeah, I would encourage people to have a look. Also, I've just looked up the London Diocese website that someone put in the chat, and that does actually look like there's a lot of information there. The other place I would recommend if people aren't religious is the Humanist UK website, which also has some information about what's going on at the moment. But I would really encourage people to look in their local areas, to Google in their local areas. In the area that I used to work in, there was an organisation called Croydon Drop-In and Off the Record. So both of them now provide online webinars and contact for young people, and both specialise in grief and bereavement in general, but I think they will be focusing on that more in the coming months. And I definitely think it's something that the government is going to have to step up and recognise going forward as well. There'll be a lot of changes, as Graham referenced, in relation to the Coronavirus Act, but also in what is being offered through the funding that's becoming available because of coronavirus. And Don has recommended Emphasis Foundation, which looks like it's online as well. So please continue to post in those areas as well. I just want to round up and ask if any of the speakers have anything further that they want to ask from, comment on from earlier, or from any of the chat that they've said that they didn't feel like they would comment on. Is anyone? They're all looking at me blankly. Okay, Graham. Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, just one point really. The kind of one of the peculiarities of lockdown is that it was pretty clear, yeah, and in the very near future things are going to change, and it's going to get a lot kind of messier. And the importance of conversations, to whether they're online or directly, to enable people to really kind of understand the complexities of what's changing, is going to be so very important in supporting this kind of transitionary period. So I think we have to keep up with our learning about what's possible and what's not, what's recommended and what's not, and really kind of think critically about how we engage with people's questions about simply what they can and what can it do as things change on a regular basis.
Thank you, Graham. Ruth, yes, you wanted to comment?
Just on that, I think that for some young people and people, it takes a long time for the change to sink in, especially people with learning disabilities. And I'm finding that a lot. That just an example, when it changed that people with autism could go out when they needed to, some people interpreted that as everybody could go out, or I can go out because I've got something like that. So helping people clarify that is really important. And also, I think we need things in picture form and video, you know, very simple, because a lot of the words that are being used are so complicated. It's hard for anyone to understand them. And I think we forget that people just get left behind, really.
Thank you, Ruth. Mike or Annie, did either of you want to come in and make any further comment? No, Mike's shaking his head. Annie's shaking her head as well. Okay, great. So just want to give people an opportunity, if you've got any further questions that you want to ask, and also to heavily promote that Steve has been posting some Q&As on the Q&A section, which is along the bottom of your page, for you to comment in, or also you can just put an E in the comment and then leave a comment afterwards. It's a sort of round up, a short evaluation, and we'd really appreciate hearing from you. There's been so much value in the information you've all been putting in the chat, and we really don't want to lose that. We want to make sure that if we do future webinars, we're putting in exactly what you need, and we definitely are looking at how detached workers can think about coming out of this area of this time into the easing, hopefully in the future, of some of the lockdown things. Just to also mention that we're going to be doing I know not very many of you are from London, which is unusual for this webinar contact, but we are going to be doing a London specific webinar in a couple of weeks with Partnership for Young London. So if any of you are based in London and the Southeast, then please keep in touch through our social media and our website, because there'll be something specific around that area in the coming weeks. We're also looking at a European shared experience webinar that Graham has mentioned, and he will hopefully be hosting in a couple of weeks as well. So we'll make sure everyone gets that information, and we will be emailing you all the information. You can also see this webinar as a video on our website in a couple of days. Donna, a Scottish one? Yeah, we would love to link up with partners in other areas of the UK. Steve is getting very excited about that, and Ruth and Annie. And there definitely are Scottish focused organisations that are working very hard. We've often had very strong engagement from Scottish detached workers with our conferences in the past, so definitely something that we want to look at in the future as well. So thank you very much. If you've got any further questions, like I said, we're going to leave the webinar open for the next half an hour. I appreciate lots of you have to go off and do other things, including face-to-face sessions, but a couple of us will be staying online with this webinar open for the next half an hour. So feel free to comment or get involved, and I can also add people's voices if there's fewer attendees to the group. So thank you very much for taking part in our webinar today. We really appreciate so many of you joining, and from all the information that you've contributed through today. And we look forward to seeing you in the future, and to hear about all your detached experiences that you'll be doing now we've taken part in this. I'm just going to comment on the fact it feels very weird that I'm just sitting here talking on my own while everyone's leaving the chat or going off to do their own things. So please wave your hand if you'd like to be able to speak normally to me. Oh, Annie will. Thank you, Annie.
Hello, you all right?
Hello.
I'm just noticing in the comments just before people are going that people are still kind of wanting to talk about what we're going to do afterwards, and I think that's something that we're starting to have that conversation now as well. We're really trying to do it in partnership with all the youth work sectors across the areas that we work in. So I don't know, just to find out what you guys are doing in terms of exit strategies from lockdown, and how you're going to kind of change what you do, or if you're going to change what you do as we start to go back out more in the streets.
Yeah, I'm unmuting people, don't worry. There you go, Graham, feel free to speak.
Yeah, it's a good question, of course. One of the things that we've talked about, and I thank Steve Walker for his prompt on this conversation, is how we ensure that and these futures is true to youth work principles. And my particular interest, and I'm sure I'll speak for Steve as well, is that these futures are developed in a participative way with young people. So we need to really encourage them to think very critically about their experiences, because those conversations will inform the kind of service that we should be bringing forward into the future. And I think that really, what that suggests really is that we're going to get different pictures depending on different communities and different realities. But across the piece, all those will be likely positive, because we've taken the time and the care to encourage young people to participate in determining those futures.
Okay.
Young people have shown real agency over the whole period. Yes, with some challenges, and I think it's really important that we capture that and move that forward, that the advocate role that we may have becomes a engagement and participation role.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I talk yet?
Yes, Thomas, feel free to jump in.
Oh,
yeah.
cool. Hi everybody, and thank you.
Yeah.
It was really great, great listening and reading the chat. I'm logging in from Dublin in Ireland, and saying across the sea the same problems, and I was talking back and forth on the chat with Anne and Annie, and a couple of concerns like we've been having is one is the access to education for young people that need very directed learning. At home has been a huge issue for us. Like I'd say about 80% to 90% of my young people that have IQ work aren't doing any school work at all, and most of them are at extreme risk of dropping out of school early. That's one issue that we really we're really facing, and I think there's going to be long-term implications for that post COVID-19. And also I shared a bit in the chat, like we were just trying to find innovative solutions to keep connected with our young people, because we were told by our board of management that we're not allowed on the street anymore. We're not allowed to connect. We're not allowed out on the street with young people, and also we didn't want to be out telling young people that they need to go home, where they do need to go home, but we didn't want to be coming into an enforcement place with young people. We wanted to give young people all the information that they need, of course, but what they do with the information is up to them. So one of the things that we've been using, I don't know, I was wondering what people kind of feel about using online gaming as a way of working with young people, because that's what we've been doing. I found it very successful, very useful, and I've been using the street work methodology and outreach methodology in engaging with the young people on this cyberspace kind of different universe. It's a place that I never thought I'd actually ever be working with young people. It's a space that I kind of never really experienced either, being in that online space with young people in gaming. So it's a different world altogether. So just wondering what people think about that.
Yeah, is there anyone who wants to talk to Thomas about that? I don't know if anybody's been using online gaming as an example of engaging with young people. Oh, Steve's talking, but he's muted. Hang on. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, there's some thinking around using technology with young people, and the challenges initially around the different type of relationship, because it's interfered with because of the technology, particularly gaming. And so one of the things that can be useful to think and plan in advance is an educative principle called gamification, where you stage learning through conversation and make sure there are planned breaks in the gaming experience to have a dialogue about something, even if it's the game itself, so that it encourages a type of communication which is more yes, informal, but it's kind of a staged way, rather than kind of it just happening because there's a break in the game, and actually leading the activity like we would in practice, rather than letting the game lead almost. And so it's a strategy that can be applied, but it's not an easy thing.
Okay, is there anyone else who's been using gaming? I think that's really helpful, Steve. Thank you. Thomas, it sounds like you might be at the forefront of using this example, so you're probably going to be the person we're going to be turning to for experience.
Well, I said the blogging. I've been doing it a while and wrote a blog. Like there's some guidance came from our Department of Children and Youth Affairs about online work. When we've been trying to replicate that kind of like the same as all the other work online about keeping young people safe and protected and stuff. It can be challenging. Like I wrote in the blog some guidelines on how to do it and how we went about it. I do like the idea of gamification, but what I've experienced with gaming is that it's very difficult to get young people to buy into what you want them to do. It's really the spaces that we've been using is we've been working with young people where they're at in that space, the same as we would work with them on the street. And like I've tried to have really organized sessions with them, and unless it's so one thing we did do, I have a group of young men and they're all mad into football, football fans. And what we did with them is we had a FIFA 20 competition night, and the winner got a pizza, So we were able to, a pizza sent to the house. So we were able to use that, and that worked really well because I had them all on the chat. we're having a conversation, and you know, we're having, you know, different conversations about different things, and also we're concentrating on the game, you know. So we kind of did do in that way, because it's very organised. I set it up, I structured it, I opened the like there's a party chat, I made it private, I invited everybody in, and blah blah blah. The issue we have is, like, if you're online and you're working with young people, unless you're off logged in as offline, young people can jump in and start chats with you, you know. And so another example, I was in a group chat with two young people, and we were playing Fortnite, and two other young people bailed into the that I didn't know. I don't work with, from a different side of the city, you know. So that threw up issues for us, you know. So it's about being able to manage that type of stuff. And I'll just finish on this. One of the things, I had two young people on playing FIFA, playing football one day, and you know, the conversation, we started having a conversation. There's one young person that came out transgender in our project, and the lads were like, "What's the story with that?" You know, and they were like, obviously straight away the prejudice came up, and they were using discriminating language against this young person. Also, we were able to have a really good conversation. But the conversation lasted about 45 minutes about this. You know, went into all sorts of stuff around LGBT and all that. So it was really, really useful. So, you know, it's a good way of keeping connect in an emergency situation for a very short period of time. That's kind of what way I've tried to be using it, you know.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate that. And there's some comments from other colleagues in the chat that you might want to have a look at as well. Keith, I see that you wanted to ask a question or make a comment, so please go ahead.
Yeah, Keith Gavron Thompson from Nose Youth Mutual. I'm an old dinosaur from the Fed. My question is because we're all getting back into detached youth work, well, some of us are in some areas, and my concern is around, if we're sending staff out on the streets, and I put this in the blog, and if they get COVID and become very ill, or God forbid, they pass away, what jurisdiction do the company have, do the business have? Because obviously governments are not saying that youth workers are key workers. So there's that grey area of should they been out there anyway? So I just want to see what the panel think of that kind of scenario.
Okay, I mean, I think Steve might also comment on this as well, Keith, and thank you for joining us. It's really nice to see you after so long, and good to hear there's still work going on up in your area as well. We've been very clear on our guidance on our website that it is the decision has to be made at a very senior level for workers to go out, and also that there's individual choice on whether workers want to go out and put themselves at risk in what is considered to be the safest way that's possible. So we're absolutely not encouraging people to just do it willy-nilly. We're saying follow the guidance that you've got at your local level, hopefully in partnership with your local authority, your police and your public health director normally, and there's been quite a lot of people who've put stuff about that, and then make a decision about who in the team wants to go out. That's definitely what Newham did, the example that I used right at the beginning of the webinar. They had a lot of conversations prior to making the decision to go out, and then only workers who wanted to go out and work with young people went and did that piece of work. So it's quite clear we would still be following that advice and giving that advice for local people. Community organisations, also including ones which are mutuals similar to you, or foundations like Young Brent, have done the same thing, and they've got information on their websites as well. So yeah, it's a balance, and we don't underestimate how difficult that is for people and what the risk can be. I don't know if Steve wanted to comment on that, or Graham.
I've just typed something in the chat that talks about there's a now period. I think you're right, Emily, that needs a collaborative decision with senior managers, and then down to an individual decision. But as we move out of lockdown, organisations are really going to have to think through how they adapt policy to respond to what will still be there, although we return to a newer type of normal. And I think that conversation is essential, and it must carry on.
Yeah, just a quick point from me. In writing the first set of guidance that has been referred to a couple of times today, I can remember saying that one of the extraordinary protective factors for detached youth workers is simply that they're working outside and they've got the capacity to move. We're going to see some extraordinary convoluted situations in buildings and factories and offices in the next few weeks. People trying to maintain social distance. So, of course, I can't offer an answer to the substantive question about legalities or whatever, because there isn't one. But recently, I watched a news item about a doctor, a mental health doctor, who started doing his consultations outside whilst walking with his patients. And I think peculiarly, we're going to see more services going outside, you know, because it creates some protective factors. We can step back, we can move away, you know, we can do this, we can demonstrate with our bodies what it is to stand such and such a distance apart. And so I do take the view, if you're sensible, it's pretty safe to work outside. You know, I've got a brother who's suffering from this illness at the moment, who works in a factory, or did until he got poorly, and it's simply been impossible for them to socially distance. So in the big scheme of things, I think risks can be minimised and managed quite well for detached youth workers. And I would just sort of reiterate that point, that we've got at our disposal one of the best of protective factors, and that's the outdoors.
Keith, while you're online, do you want to just say a little bit about what you've got going on with your mutual up there during this period, if it could help? And then Amy, Corey, or Adil might want to come in and comment on what they've got going on as well.
Yeah, sure. We've got, as a lot of the panel, a lot of the people today have been saying, a lot of sort of on the web, through the chats. A lot of our groups are meeting. Some of our young carers meetings are on the web as well. We do packs for young people, activity packs for young people to get out there. One thing that we have found, and I think this is probably right across the national picture, and it's been mentioned, is that we're working a lot more directly with the community. So, for instance, when we're working with our young carers, the below 10-year-olds who haven't got access to the computer or to the web, we're usually sitting next to the mum or the dad or the guardian whilst we're working with them, and they're jumping in saying, can you get me some food packs? Can you get me this? Can you get me that? So it just becomes naturally holistic. And I think the togetherness of all what's been happening is probably a phenomenon that is not being recognised as this is all going on. So everything that everyone's been doing, we've been doing as well. We also set up all the lines into keeping I suppose running some of the bigger groups around youth forums. And one of the things that we're finding as well is, if the worker's not there, some of these youth forums meet anyway and carry on, which is a great asset, and hats off to the workers in terms of getting them into that position. So yeah, a lot of the work is carrying on virtual. It's just that we're going to be moving into, like everybody is sort of letting the phoenix rise of Detached, and they'll be out and they'll be there and everywhere, and we'll be everything to everyone. So just some of the concerns around what we'll look like and how we can protect staff around, as you mentioned before, risk assessments, etc., when we're out there.
Great, thank you so much, Keith, for contributing. I don't know if Adil or Corey wanted to comment on anything from your areas, or any of the other attendees. I know there's a number of you still online who haven't chosen to speak. If not, then we'll start to round up. We'll leave it open for another 5 to 10 minutes, but it feels like a lot of the comments have stopped in the area. So if anyone wants to just have a conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and be able to talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, can I just...
Yeah, of course, Adil, please speak.
Something? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just yeah, we have had some conversations with regards to our sort of how we deliver detached. I'll introduce myself first. So my name's Adil Hadi. I'm one of the senior youth workers for Birmingham Youth Service, Birmingham City Council. I'm based over at Concord Youth Centre. space over inner city Birmingham, Sparkbrook. Predominantly work with young people who are from, let's say, sort of newly arrived, more settled, existing communities that have been there for some time. Quite a difficult and challenging area to work within. Lots.
Sorry, Adil.
Sorry, forgive me. Right, I'm back.
That's
Sorry.
all right.
Yeah. So currently, some of the things that we've been working with, I have been sort of posting that to young people and working with a local charitable organisation, trying to connect food parcels to families and to young people, or the young people that we work with. So we've been contacting them on our social medias and our socials, particularly Instagram. Instagram's been, we've been quite fortunate to have lots of young people on our Instagram. So, and young people know other young people. So that's helped us identify young people who are in need of food parcels. So we've gone out there to deliver alongside a guy called Rashid from a sort of local Islamic charity to some of the sort of really sort of in need families. So some of that does involve the conversation, on the doorstep, and we have a young man that was suffering from mental health issues, self-harming and stuff like that. So we spent about half an hour at his doorstep, just trying to offer him the support that he needs. And my colleague Natalie, who's also, I think she's still in the room somewhere, sending out the information online to him over his emails. But yeah, so that's the type of stuff that we've been doing. We're doing some Instagram, trying to do some Instagram live stuff as well, trying to communicate with young people online. Unfortunately, the Detached Youth Work for Birmingham City Council is not obligatory, it's optional, especially for those that are who want to do it. Now, we've got a couple of detached youth workers that have chosen to go out as part, who don't fit in the realm of high risk as such, who have done the necessary checks and balances, who've gone through the guidelines, especially the NYA guidelines that were sent out. So they've kind of configured them and the risk assessments in order for them to be able to sort of go out there. And again, it is very much light touch stuff. It's kind of asking, if young people are safe, kind of not necessarily enforcement, but it's more about, should you be at home, and is it, do you think you're doing the right thing by being out there? So that's been happening on behalf of some of our colleagues in Birmingham Youth Service. However, some of the colleagues are not well, so they're not in a very good place, or their families aren't in a very good place, so they've opted out of that. The other thing that we're really, really keen on, and myself is really keen, is online gaming. The online gaming, I've been speaking to some colleagues and stuff around running a competition, a FIFA competition. I know you said something, is it Thomas, that you're doing some stuff that's great. We've been doing the background research on what that looks like. How do we connect with young people in that sphere? Because we know there's a lot of young people that don't even access the centres and services are out in the streets, but are very much online, are very active online, or just do a lot of online gaming. So we believe that there's space there in order for us to kind of connect with young people that probably could do with the support in those spaces. So one of the ideas we're doing is, again, it's a PS4 competition. It is with young people, but we're not necessarily getting involved. So I'm not going to have, because I'm not good, I'm not going to be any good at PS4. So I'm going to get my ass whooped anyway. I know I will, so it'll be embarrassing. But what we're trying to do is through Instagram connect people so they share their gamer tags. And it's monitored and overseen by myself and my colleague, hopefully Natalie. So we're going through all the due diligence to see how it all works. So so they share tags, and then if they and obviously it's all age restricted as well. Anybody under the age of we think under the age of 16 definitely would need some kind of consent. The parents would need to email us over some kind of consent to say that it's okay for their son or daughter to share their user ID. And also the other things that go along with that as well, in terms of that, getting them to understand the particular challenges online and stuff like that. And yeah, so what we're trying to do is a competition. It's been happening with one of our police colleagues called Dave. He's been doing this thing for some time now, so he's kind of advising us on how to do it. But it's done through a police organisation. So the police have got this organised a group or a project called the Safe Haven. And they've been doing it, but their protocols are a bit different to ours. Ours are probably a little different, and we have to run that through the mill to see what comes out in terms of if there's anything that we've missed out. We have to do a lot of trial and error to see what the challenges are moving forward. But I definitely think there's a space or a platform. So one more thing, sorry, I wanted to mention was how we stream young people gaming online. This was a big issue. Do we use sort of like things like Twitch or YouTube, or to actually get wider participation rather than just 2 people playing? We want to get everybody involved. So we're thinking about actually we're trying to explore the option of whether we should use something like Twitch, which streams the game so other people can access the game. So, and actually the competition will also include the amount of people, the game that was the most viewed. So as part of the competition, in terms of the prize that they get, whether they get a £50 voucher or whatever, we haven't decided the prize yet, was actually the game that was the most viewed. Now we're exploring options of using Zoom, whether young people would use Zoom and video themselves, and video, if that's not, so we are trialing and erroring lots of different ways in which that could be a live stream. So again, we're endeavouring some challenges going through that, and we're ruling some things out. So it may just be you just send us an image on Instagram of the person who won the competition, who won the game, and then that way you can decide to stay friended or you can unfriend yourself. So we are definitely looking at doing something like that, and then hopefully by next week, if we get all our dot the I's and cross the T's, hopefully that should be something that we'll be doing next week. Hopefully all being well. Thank you, Emily.
Oh, thank you so much, Adil. We really appreciate that, and I think that crosses over with some of the stuff that Thomas was talking about in Ireland as well, in Dublin there. So that's really useful to know that other people are doing it. And I know that Onside Youth Zones quite often stream their tournaments as well, and they use Switch. So yeah, that's definitely stuff there. Also, I would recommend for anyone who hasn't done any stuff with the online so far, is that the Mix are the lead on the 3 partnership piece of work, who do most of the online stuff. So yeah, definitely look at their website as well. Thank you for your comments, Steve, in the chat as well. Sorry, Keith, did you want to comment?
Yeah, can I just go off course for a second and come offline for a minute and look at land games? As one of our outdoor centres, we're looking at the way you have a map of where to go and what to do, and you have lines in the shopping centres, and they're all 2 meters apart, and the floor plans are set out. We're looking at that in our outdoor centre. So we're looking at how can we use that kind of spread, that kind of floor plan, because outdoor centres are primarily group work sessions, and how we can sort of space that out so they're still doing group work, but socially, I was going to say socially isolated then, but spaced out nicely, so they're still within the sort of the rules of the government. So we're looking at that at the moment, and we're going to be looking at across other services to see whether they have got any plans like that.
And I definitely think that's something that with the easing of the lockdown, there'll be definitely people thinking about that in terms of adventure playgrounds and outdoor ed centres, and trying to work out a way that all the amazing facilities and resources that they have can give young people an opportunity. And often those places are very inbuilt for people who have additional needs or disabilities as well. And I think that those young people are going to be feeling incredibly isolated at the moment, on top of the social isolation that we have as part of the lockdown. So yeah, one of the things I didn't mention earlier, which I would just like to highlight, is there was an article on The Guardian this week about on BuzzFeed this week about LGBTQ young people and the experience that they're having as part of the lockdown, and how difficult that is. And so we'll put a link on our website to that as well, just to recognise where young people might have additional complexities to being in lockdown if they haven't come out to their family yet, or if they're questioning any of their gender or identity. And I know a lot of us work with groups of young people like that, or individuals on the streets or in centres. So yeah, it's good to acknowledge those areas. We've only got 6 minutes left of this webinar, so if there's anyone who particularly would like to make a comment, sorry, Steve Blower would. Let me just unmute you, Steve. and we would love for you to ask your question. And this will probably be our last one. So go ahead, Steve.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hey, thanks for the webinar. It's been really interesting, really helpful. Thank you. I'm based up in Scarborough at Sidewalk Youth Project, which is a detached project. I think it's got a history of connection with the Fed, so it's nice to come and join in with you guys. So the question I've got is around a bit to do with what Mike was talking about at the beginning, around advocacy and youth voice, and just thinking through some of the kind of issues of, I think a lot of the narrative is about how young people have a lot of needs and there's a lot of vulnerabilities, and just thinking through how can we use this time when we're engaging in a space that young people are the pros, to really take stock and learn from young people and find ways to make sure that their voices are sort of being channeled and heard in terms of shaping what happens next. I'll put that as a comment for perhaps future webinar conversation. And I know kind of, yeah, Mike mentioned about the kind of the stuff around the aims of your organisation around advocacy. And just,
okay, I think Mike and Ruth are both nodding. I think they might both want to make a comment. So and thank you, Steve. Yes, we knew your predecessor Andy very well, so it's good to know that you're still around and advocating for detached work. It's brilliant. So nice to cyber meet you. But let me just pass you over to Ruth and Mike, who might want to just comment on their area from your question / comment.
Cool.
Yeah, I suppose for me, from an advocacy point of view, we've realised more so in this situation than ever before that young people are having things done to them. And so as part of the packs that we're offering to families and young people, we're putting things in there about the rights that young people have, because what we're finding is that some professionals other than youth workers are taking liberties when it comes to how they're working with young people. And so I think for me, the advocacy part of it is very much in this time, helping young people to understand their rights in this time. So that's the work that we're doing from that point of view.
Emily, can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, hang on, Chris. Sorry, Ruth, did you just want to make a comment about advocacy? Thank you, Mike.
It's sort of related, but I think we have to, a lot of young people don't have the technology. And the other thing is about choice, about coming to drop-ins and things like that. I spoke to a young person I work with. She's autistic and she's got a child. And she said, "Oh no, I don't want to go. I don't want them to see my child, and I'm going to be in my pajamas." You know, and then the only other choice is she's got a phone conversation. So it's just thinking about those sorts of things, really.
Great, thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Steve, for that comment. I think you can see that there is stuff going on. We're going to round up now, but I know that Chris Charles, the chair of our trustees, would just like to make a final comment before we end. But just thank you very much to all of you for being involved with this webinar, and we hope to see you in the future at another one. So, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry I've not been too involved in kind of the speaking and the visual space. I've got very poor internet connection where I am, and I hope you can hear me clearly enough. I just kind of wanted to respond a little bit to some of the advocacy conversation. Some of the work I'm involved with at the moment, very much in kind of Manchester and European, is about creating living youth charters with young people. I think we've spoken a lot about creative approaches on the streets and how we're all trying to adapt our work in the areas that we're in. But maybe looking at some of this platform-based stuff through gaming, through music, through different approaches, young people can find a way of sharing that voice. A lot of the stuff that we've achieved in Greater Manchester and across kind of Italy and France and Germany and other areas is to provide spaces where the young people have the choice to share the voice the way they want to. I absolutely agree with kind of Mike and Graham about the human rights right now is really key. There's a lot of work and a lot of voices, adults speaking on behalf of young people in very specific conversations. And if we're not careful, we will fall into a structure that is things done to young people rather than young people making a choice about what their new normal looks like. I think some of the stuff that I really want to take forward into conversations with the Fed and would love for you guys to get more involved with in future webinars is, I think, you know, this conversation around permissions and status of workers on the ground is absolutely key. In some local areas, there is an acceptance for the workers to be there doing the work. In others, there isn't. And picking up on what Keith was saying about, you know, worst case scenarios of someone being out there doing the work, bringing the virus home and someone passing, where does that accountability lie with the organisations? I think some of the conversations that we're having nationally right now is about putting a lot of pressure onto the government to actually put the status in place so that we can work in a national way rather than a local way. We have to have the confidence to be able to deliver the work and deliver it in the right way for the young people we're supporting. And something as the, you know, as the chair of the Fed and with the team, that's something that's very paramount in our conversations. The linked up thinking around that is really important. So a lot of the themes that we're going to lift from the chat and from the statements that have been made will create those themes moving forward, and we will continue to respond to everybody that's out there doing this work. You know, it's been a while since there's been a spotlight on detached youth work, and it's key right now that we keep that spotlight focused on us and we are able to do the work we need to do. Our relationships are very important, and we link those young people that do not access centres, do not access provision, are living in poverty and in lots of different, you know, in lots of different ways can't access that virtual offer. That face-to-face work for me and for the Fed is still very important. You know, I think all the guys have spoken quite clearly about that, and Graham, you know, talking about promoting young people to go out and take that hour of exercise for their mental health, to do things in the right way. It's important we're out there sharing and witnessing that for the young people. And I think another theme that's come through really clearly for me, and I know this is starting to touch more and more of us, is bereavement. And I think young people are going to have to, you know, we're going to have to really support young people in how they understand this and how we move beyond it. As a nation, you know, we're already up to nearly 30,000 people that have passed, and a high percentage of those are key. You know, the key worker within that is kind of growing as a number as well. You know, so we've got to work safely. We've got to update, and something that we will be looking at as the Fed is updating our guidance in line with the information that's coming through the national conversations. So, you know, we'll keep posting it, and you guys, you know, as we do more webinars, your voice is really important in that. And I think also the connection to the young people you're working with is very important in that. So maybe one of the themes which I've seen in some of the other cities that I've worked in, they've actually started to create these webinar spaces just for the young people to have these conversations rather than the workers. Or maybe there's a key panel and young people can have this conversation directly with that panel. You know, I think we need to look at how we can bring that voice to the forefront and support young people at this really challenging time. Thank you so much. I'm gonna back out now and let Emily wrap us up, but just, you know, a massive thank you for joining us, and thanks to the team for putting all the hard work into getting this webinar going. Cheers.
Yes, thank you so much for those of you that stayed on at the end. Just going to name check you all so that you know we appreciate you. Keith, Thomas, Adil, Corey, Jamela, Kirk, Vanessa, Steve and Rachel. We really hope to see you at our next webinar. Please log off now because we're going to have a little debrief without you.